tourists don't remember history, they replay it. Every year, millions of visitors wander through the gardens of Versailles, admiring the beauty, the silence, and the elegance of a world long gone. But there is one path most of them never think twice about, a place where, if you hear the rustle of silk behind you, you must never turn. And if a woman dressed in 18th century finery silently asks for your attention, whatever you do, don't answer her. Today's story is based on one of the strangest legends ever whispered about the Palace of Versailles, a tale of memory, obsession, and a presence that doesn't want your life, it wants your place. So dim the lights, listen carefully, and remember, some voices never need words to be heard. This is 9 Lives of Fear.
I was standing near the east facade of the Grand Trianon when I first heard the rustle. The sound was so peculiar that despite the bright early summer afternoon, it seemed to bear no relation to anything around it. Not the dappled sunlight, not the laughter and chatter of tourists, not the calling of birds. It was a faint, delicate sound, like silk stretching over stone, so soft that if you closed your eyes there would be no visible sign of what caused it. Footsteps on the crushed gravel made their usual indifferent noise, yet the rustle behind me seemed strangely loud by comparison, as though it existed above that noise rather than within it. It was deliberate, persistent. It made me feel as if a stranger had fallen into step a few paces behind me, brushing skirts against the stones with each footfall. My mind, which always tries to find patterns, seized on this one and refused to let go. We are built, after all, to locate the source of a sound, an instinct honed over generations, whether it warns of an attack or calls out for help from something small and afraid. So I listened for it the way we always do. Strangely though, the woods around me were quiet to an unsettling degree. No birds sang, no leaves rustled, even the hedges barely swayed. There was nothing else to compete for my attention, nothing to explain why my mind fixed so completely on that one sound. Then it came again, sharper this time, and I froze. I turned my head slowly to the right, and the moment seemed to stretch as if time itself were making room for what came next. The air thickened around me, dense enough that I could feel it move as I moved. The rustle grew clearer, not louder, but more precisely articulated, until I could hear every thread of the invisible fabric. The faint weave, the soft sigh of the cloth, the moment a thread caught on some rough edge and snagged. When I finally turned to look, I was struck at once by beauty and by dread. A few steps away, a tall silhouette stood against a backdrop of lilac lavender bushes lining the path. Her dress was an exquisite feat of historical recreation, ivory taffeta, layered and pleated in the style of the French court around 1775, the kind a lady-in-waiting to a queen might have worn. Light seemed to radiate from the fabric itself, every fold caught and threw its own small play of shadow, and along the hem ran a delicate silver embroidery of fleur-de-lis that flickered like tiny stars. But there was no face. Where her features should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin the color of marble, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. My mind scrambled to fill the void, a soft cheekbone, a raised eyebrow, the ghost of a smile. The longer I stared, the heavier that absence became, pressing against my thoughts like a physical weight. Around her, the hedges, which should have stood in perfect straight lines, leaned inward, as though even the garden's order was bending toward her. The gravel beneath my feet seemed to shift, every stone a tiny compass needle pointing her way. And though nothing stirred the air, I sensed an intake of breath, not a sound so much as a resonance, felt in the bones rather than heard, like a cello string barely grazed by the bow. My heart pounded not from fear, but from the unsettling certainty that she had reached me not through my eyes, but through whatever had turned the act of my looking into an offering. When she finally turned to face me fully, a faint tremor rippled through the air just ahead of her, like a heat haze rising from a desert road, but cold instead of hot. At its edge flickered a shimmer of ultraviolet light, so faint it was almost imperceptible. It vanished in an instant, but in that single heartbeat, the world beyond her seemed to fracture. The gardens I stood in were no longer the well-kept lawns of 2026, but Versailles bathed in the amber light of a late afternoon in 1783. I caught the scent of wet soil and distant citrus blossom, mingled with the sweeter, powdery smell of wigs and rouge. A murmur of court conversation reached me, faint as a whisper heard through water, but unmistakably real. The woman before me was not a ghost in any conventional sense, not a soul lingering at the site of her death. She was something else, an anchor point, a fragment of an era that had somehow become self-sustaining, feeding on the attention of visitors who unknowingly tuned themselves to her frequency. Among the garden's keepers there is a quiet story, that a lady-in-waiting, caught in a moment of overwhelming emotion during a secret meeting with her lover. A confession, perhaps, or a broken promise was somehow suspended in that instant, and the chateau's limestone absorbed it whole. The stone, soaked at once with confession and vow, became something like a recording medium. The moment replays itself whenever a visitor's mind happens to fall into sync with its frequency. The rustle of silk against gravel, the flash of an 18th century gown catching the light, the very human instinct to turn toward an unexplained sound. Beneath her silence, which was not truly a plea but something closer to a command wearing the mask of vulnerability, she would sometimes lift one gloved hand and point, almost imperceptibly, down the path ahead, inviting and at the same time claiming. To answer her, whether by speaking, by mimicking her gesture, or simply by looking too long, was to become part of the sequence. Her capture endlessly repeated, and yours along with it, dragged back into the stone's memory. Researchers from the Institut de Physique du Temps, brought in after a string of disappearances, concluded that the limestone of Versailles had an unusually specific crystalline structure, one capable of recording not only sound but light, and of replaying both in a form not unlike a hologram. The conditions had to be precise: clear light, low ambient noise, and a resonance matching the molecular vibration of silk taffeta against stone. That, they believed, explained the woman's appearance as nothing more than a flash of recorded history, and her missing face as a limitation of the recording's resolution. Denid features to look at, the visual cortex tries to invent them, so the face each visitor sees is built from their own expectations and their own fears. I had read the accounts before I ever came here, tourists who spoke with her and never walked back out through the garden gates. Their names lingered in the park's lost and found records, filed under nothing but a timestamp and a strange clinical note, non-receptive to the usual recovery procedures. Those who survived, who managed to leave before speaking to her, all described the same overwhelming certainty, that to ignore her would be an act of cruelty, an abandonment of a helpless soul caught between worlds. That was her craft. She turned morality itself into a lure, drawing out the instinct to help with nothing more than the tilt of one hand. The gesture was subtle, just enough to suggest desperation, the fingers bent at an angle that any of us would read as someone reaching for help. She never spoke. Her eyes never pleaded because she had no eyes to plead with, but the mind, denied any real context, fills in its own story. She is lost, frightened, abandoned by a lover who left her here. And if I do nothing, she will be trapped in that same loop forever. The more I resisted the pull to help her, the louder the rustle grew behind me, as though the moment itself were a net drawing tighter. The pressure built against my mind like something pushing from outside my own skull. I could barely breathe. Every inhale seemed to carry more than air, a memory's ghost of rosewater, and beneath it, the acrid trace of an old gunpowder salute. My mind conjured her lover unbidden, a handsome young officer in uniform, his face caught between hope and fear, walking away and leaving her alone among the hedges. The longer I stood there, the more vivid the memory became, until it was difficult to tell where her memory ended and mine began. After enough disappearances, the garden's keepers had quietly worked out a set of rules for anyone who found themselves caught in her presence. They were posted, easy to miss, on a small weatherproof plaque near the entrance to the Trianon's East Walk, the kind of thing most visitors glance past without reading. Rule 1: Do not look at her directly, let her stay at the edge of your vision. Rule 2: Keep a steady pace, let your footsteps mask the rustle behind you, never match it, never slow. Rule 3: Do not mimic anything you see, not her gesture, not her stillness, not her breath. Rule 4: Listen for the turning point, the moment the high, delicate rustle stops abruptly, replaced by the gradual return of birdsong and distant fountains. Rule 5: Once you're past that point, you may still remember the sound. Do not turn back to check. Turning back can summon the memory again, and the memory can pull you into the loop. I had skimmed the plaque once and dismissed it as a charming bit of park folklore. Now, with the rustle rising steadily behind me, I understood that every word on it might be the only thing standing between me and her garden forever. I tightened my grip on the strap of my camera, a lightweight mirrorless one modern enough to feel out of place here, and forced myself to look straight ahead at the gravel path. What had been a plain stone surface now seemed to glitter faintly, each fragment lit as if from within, like 100 tiny beacons switching on at once. My heart hammered like a metronome as I counted my steps under my breath. Left, right, left, right. I refused to let the rustle's gentle, insistent pull override my pace. It rose behind me in a slow crescendo, a weave of small scraping sounds and soft sighs, as if a dozen petticoats brushed together in some impossibly small space. I could feel it in my jaw before I consciously heard it, a low vibration carried through the limestone itself. At the edge of my vision I caught glimpses, a flash of white fabric, the glint of silver thread catching the light like a distress signal. I breathed slowly and deliberately, the way the plaque had advised, letting each breath act as a buffer between my thoughts and hers. The change came exactly as promised. The path bent gently to the left, opening onto the wide sweep of the Grand Perspective, stretching all the way down to the Grand Canal. Beneath the sound that had followed me the whole way, I began to make out other things. Children laughing somewhere behind me, sparrows chirping, the distant rattle of a maintenance cart. With every step past the turn, the high, threading note grew fainter, until only the faintest trace remained, something that could easily have been wind through a distant lime tree. The birds returned first, tentative calls giving way to a full, confident chorus. The light shifted too. The harsh brightness that had made every fold of her gown seem to exist in some other dimension, softening into the warm, ordinary gold of late afternoon. Under that gentler light, the marble statues looked once again like statues, not silent guards standing watch. I forced myself not to break my pace, even as a sudden prickling at the back of my neck urged me to look behind me and confirm I was alone. "You can never truly return to the gardens alone," the plaque's final line echoed in my mind. When I finally passed through the wrought iron gate marking the boundary of the gardens in a sanctum, a uniformed guard gave a small, expressionless bow. I returned it, my heart still hammering, and stepped out onto the wide avenue leading to the palace's main courtyard. Behind me I could hear footsteps on the stones, my own, unmistakably. No one else was there to make them. The silence I had walked through was gone, replaced by the familiar hum of a tourist site in 2026. I took a few more steps, then stopped and turned to look back at the gardens. The hedges stood in their usual neat lines. The gravel path was empty. The sun cast long, soft shadows, and the statue of Apollo's chariot gleamed in the light. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet standing there I still caught it, the faintest suggestion of fabric brushing against stone, barely at the edge of hearing. I laughed, a short, exhausted sound, and told myself it was nothing more than my nervous system trying to make sense of something it couldn't otherwise explain, that I had simply crossed paths with an old woman, long since past, who had pointed me in the right direction as I walked. That's the story my mind would keep telling itself if I let it, if I never looked closer. But some part of me knew better. What I had seen was a woman whose only wish was to guide someone, anyone, trapped by a moment 2.5 centuries old that would not let her go. Without a second thought, I left the gardens behind, the sound fading with every step, and made myself a promise. I would never again walk the Trianon's eastern path alone, not unless I wanted to become the next attentive ear for her silent, unanswerable plea.
The Lady of Versailles was never searching for a conversation. She was waiting for an answer. And perhaps that is what makes encounters like this so terrifying. It is not the ghostly figure, the impossible sounds, or the secrets hidden within forgotten halls. It is the moment when we choose to respond. Because not every voice from the past is calling for help. Some whispers are invitations. Some doors are meant to remain closed. We walk through places like Versailles believing we are only visitors passing through. But sometimes the past notices us. And once you answer the darkness, it knows you are there. Until the next tale rises from the shadows, remember, the night may end, but the whispers never truly fade. You've survived another tale from 9 lives of fear, but don't get comfortable. If the shadows whispered to you tonight, Hit like before they whisper again. Share this video with someone who thinks they're brave. Let's see how long their courage lasts. And subscribe, because around here, every click feeds the darkness, and the darkness remembers. Where the shadows linger long after the story ends. Stay scared.